This is Merrily Enquist, historian for the Oregon Small Woodlands Association. It's October 18th, 1994, and I'm out near Deer Island, Oregon, speaking with K.C. Van Natta at his home. K.C. was the third president of Oregon Small Woodlands Association. And what were those years, K.C., that you served?
1972 to 1977.
Okay. Well, Casey, let's take a little step aside here, and would you tell me a little bit about your background? You mentioned that you are a biologist, and I also picked up that your family had been out here since about 1940. So how about a little family background here?
Well, my dad purchased the ground in 1940, and we moved out here in 1942. This was all railroad logs back in the 20s, late 20s. It was purchased for a cattle ranch. The biggest tree on the place wasn't more than 3 or 4 feet high. I've lived here since then. My only time I'm absent was when I was in college. I mentioned I'm a biologist. I have a degree in biology from Willamette University, 1957. And I've been a logger on the tree farm here since 1966.
That's quite a length of experience there. So this has been the family tree farm for quite a while. I can see that. Let's talk a little bit about Oregon Small Woodlands back in the early years of the organization. I think you mentioned to me that time out for a phone call here. You mentioned to me that Buck Nash was the first president, and the second was
Bob Kintai. Presently Senator Kintai lives at Springfield.
Uh-huh. And then, of course, you were the third. I ask each one of the presidents that I speak with this same question. When would you say that Oregon Small Woodlands first began as a state organization?
I think it was 1966. The first secretary and the man that started it was Charlie Ross, a retired extension agent. He lives over in the Corvallis area. Mm-hmm. That's as good a year as I can come up with.
About 1966. Well, I get a variety of years, and of course the whole idea of Oregon Small Woodlands, I think probably even earlier than that, was beginning in some of the counties.
Well, there were county associations before that. I'm sure there were. Mm-hmm. But Charlie was the one that sort of got it started. He'd be an interesting guy to talk to. He's in his 80s now.
Uh-huh.
You never know.
I was just in Corvallis, so I think I'll have to make another trip back there. I always like to go back to Corvallis. Well, we've mentioned some of the early presidents but who would you say were some of the early leaders in the organization, or just in forestry back in the early days of our organization? Not necessarily presidents, but just people that you would remember as being really influential in helping with small woodlands and forestry.
Well, there were several of us that you could find in Salem. Bert Udell and Clyde Ramsey. There were a couple other people that have passed on now whose names I can't remember. And then we used to, if we needed somebody, we get on the phone, we can usually scrounge them out of the woodwork. That's as many as I can come up with right now.
That's it, okay. When you were president, can you recall for me during that period, what were some of the major issues that the organization was addressing in that period, like in the early to mid-70s at least?
Well, two things come to mind. One is we changed the timber tax law from an ad valorem to a severance tax during that period of time. Mm-hmm. Actually, that happened in '77, but the discussion for it took on for 3 or 4 years or more before that. And the other thing, which was always an issue and still is an issue, is log exports. People that don't want to export any logs and restrict our markets.
So that was a concern even back in the early 70s.
That
I was
a-
not aware of that.
That was a problem. That was a problem back in the early 70s. And then we did some, sometime when I was president, and I don't know what year it was now, I was in D.C. to testify on when they were messing with the federal tax code.
Uh-huh.
And they were some danger of the capital gains disappearing. Well, eventually did, but it didn't then.
Oh. Yes, we still worry about capital gains.
No, don't worry about it now. You don't have it.
Like to in my business. Okay. I'm sure you were influential in shaping legislation with regard to timber taxes back in that era, and I think from my perspective probably Clyde Ramsey was one of the leaders. True?
No question about that.
And who are some of the others that really helped you to get some fairly favorable legislation going?
Well, the timber companies had the real problem because the old ad valorem system mistreated you rather badly the older your timber got. So if you had old growth timber, you were in a real case of hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And because the younger stuff didn't go on until it was over 12 inches in diameter, and a certain percentage of it was over 12 inches. And the value still wasn't too bad then. And Clyde and I have always been supporters of one side of a timber tax, but we never agreed on the systems. I've been a severance tax person. He's been a pay-as-you-go person, which is fine. But we've gotten along.
Okay. There's always a room for a little argument, I guess, about these things. Everything seems to go in cycles, Casey. And right now we're in a period of really intense change, it seems from my point of view, but maybe from yours it's just been intense change going on all along. But right now I'm noticing that, at least as far as our tree farm is concerned, and I think that it's affecting everyone the same way, there's just intense public interest in how we are managing our tree farms. They seem to have very great consideration for, how are we doing this and why are we doing what we're doing. Can you provide any historic perspective on how we reached this point?
Well, yes, possibly. The timber industry has been an industry of people who got up early in the morning and went to work before the rest of the world did. You find them on the road at 6 when everybody's still getting out of bed. And they haven't done any PR work. They haven't explained to people the job they were doing. Now, there's been some instances in the way back when the job they did wasn't the prettiest, and they did some things that probably shouldn't have been done. But most of these haven't happened for the last 30, 40 years. But people don't know that. The timber industry is just a non-existent thing, and it's supplied money to the economy, and nobody even realizes it. A fair portion of schools have lost more money to the owl and federal timber than they'll ever lose from Measure 5. But nobody ever mentions that.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not discussed, and even the school administrators don't act like it was happening.
Mm-hmm.
But I suspect that these are the things people don't like to see clear cuts. They don't realize that timber is #1 in their personal economy as far as the state of Oregon is concerned, so they have not been too nice to us in some respects.
Mm-hmm. So a little bit more public information about what we're doing probably would
Well,
help. I think we're beginning to move in that direction.
We're doing a lot more of this and have for the last 10 or 15 years. But, but unfortunately, the people that get our kids first, and the school teachers, some of them are tree huggers of the worst order, and they fill them up with stories that you can't believe. And then we have some nice kids' cartoons on the weekends, which are not much better. That are fourth order fairy tales at best, transcribed as being the truth.
Yeah. Well, I think we have a long way to go, but at least we've begun some work with the public, and I was pleased to see that there was an organization of ladies that are making trips out to schools and taking some information about tree farming out. It's also been my observation, I'll just toss out in case you want to respond to it, that In general, there seems to be no differentiation in the mind of many people between a major timber company owning thousands and thousands of acres and someone who may have 20, 30 acres, 100 acres, 200 or 300 acres of timber. What one is doing is just as this seems to get lumped with another, and it seems to me some of the large timber companies have done some things that, even in my eyes, I think looked a little strange to me. But smaller operations such as we have on our tree farm, we should be able to do those things that are best for our farm.
Yes, if you're a timber industry, you're sort of thrown in the same corner with everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Painted with the same brush.
You're painted with the same brush. It doesn't make much difference. They don't, percentage-wise, you can find as much damage on, on 20 acres as you can on 100 acres. Really, it just looks a little different. Uh-huh. But we're not. The only thing, we got a couple things that they can't deny, and they will. But even that has changed. For years, the small woodland owner was the only one who was growing inventory. So we got got the raspberry for not managing our timber. Of course, managing being harvesting. But with the owl shutting up the federal timber, this has changed. The inventory that we'd been building for years is suddenly being used. And some people can't figure out why. If you'd been a seller of timber, and I had, years ago, I had friends in the small woodland from the southern part of the state, Roseburg area, who could not sell their wood because the timber company says, we don't buy farmer logs, we only buy federal timber, and we can't be bothered with your farmer logs. Well, those same timber companies have been living on so-called farmer logs for the last 3 years, or they don't exist. They've had to change a heart, and this is and so that inventory is being used.
Yep. Well, during your term in office, what would you say were some of the major accomplishments of the Oregon Small Woodlands Association? I know you mentioned that you guys participated in the new tax laws that came in at that time. Were there any major accomplishments that, other than working on that you recall and that you could mention?
Well, the first set of forest practices, I believe, came in '73.
Oh.
And so we had been working on that, did work on that some. I don't have a lot of remembrance as to what happened, but I know we were there. We did get a timber tax change, and probably because of a lot of turnout of small woodland over a period of about 4 years did we get the systems, the benefits we had, because we had members of the legislature who couldn't figure out why a Douglas fir tree shouldn't be taxed the same as an apple tree in his backyard in Portland. And there are some pretty good reasons why, but it took a lot of explaining to those people to get the message through to them. I guess the other thing is we spent, we encouraged membership building. There were no associations from east of the mountains at all, no county associations from east of the mountains in the early '70s. We kept getting a little interest and kept getting a few and attempt to build our own, because you can't have organization if you don't build membership. That has got to be number one. If you have no members, you have no organization. And that is, of course, today still a problem.
Yes. Well, our new president mentioned that right off the bat, one of her main concerns was going to be building membership this year.
Well, they haven't got a good system for billing, and they lost a lot last year because they didn't get one set of billing done, and that's that was an oversight somewhere along the road. It needs to get cured.
Okay. Were there any other than just talking to member to prospective member? Were there any techniques that you used back in the '70s to recruit more members, get the word out?
Well, we did some of the same things that have been done since then. There were mailings once in a while from a county to prospective timber owners. Some of it was, arms were twisted.
Always.
Some mailings take place. I don't have any real good examples of anything we did that brought in armloads of people, but I don't think any one thing did.
Property tax rules.
Well, we pulled names off property tax rolls. They're still doing that.
Yeah.
And did mailings.
It just has to be a constant concern, I think, and where you just kind of keep working away at it and keep talking to the folks. Probably the very best one is just each guy talking to his neighbor.
Yeah, well, we started sometime during my term. Ron Larson put it together as a treasurer, and I don't know who typed it up now. A sort of a newsletter, a little briefing affair, which we still call the update.
Oh, yes.
We don't know what we called it then, but it was done through ad mail in Portland.
Oh,
Yeah, and that got started sometime. Happened once in a while whenever we needed something. We sent one to everybody.
Yeah. Well, to move on now to maybe to another little focus, let's look into the future if we could. We've got a lot of challenges for sure. New riparian rules and uncertainties about exports of logs and where we're going to be marketing our timber. Tax changes just this year on our timber taxes, forest management. There's a lot of frustration with it right now. Where do you think we're going to be as small woodland owners? What's the situation going to be maybe 10 years, 20 years from now? Can you see anything in your crystal ball, Casey?
Wish I knew the answer to that. Every time anybody else came up with an answer, the Buter report was done way back when, said that when my kids in college, stumpage value of timber was going to be $500 to $800. When my kids were in college, you were lucky if you could find anybody that'd buy this stuff because they had a little timber recession. They were giving back state and federal timber sales. So the people that make reports, they're supposed to be smart guys, don't necessarily know what's happening. If you believe anything that I have seen anywhere in the recent past, is the demand for wood fiber is increasing and will continue to increase to some extent. If due to no other reason, due to the increase in population and use in other parts of the world as their standard of living increases. And we happen to live in the best place to grow and regenerate timber. Lots of places can grow it as fast as we do, and lots of places have it, but farming it as such is difficult in some of those places. And we happen to have a good tree which lends itself well to that, and the mouth of the Columbia River happens to be the center of the Douglas area for Douglas fir, and we have also one of the best trees in the world for large timbers. And poles, although we're remanufacturing wood fiber and making other things, doesn't really make any difference. It just means that the more or the faster you can grow it, well, the more you're going to have to sell.
So you're seeing a strong continuing demand for wood fiber. I can't see that.
I don't see that changing. People talk about substitutes, but when you talk about the energy, the conversion factors energy-wise, I'm talking about calories of energy to make concrete or steel or plastics. They cannot compete with wood. And the price of energy is going to get much worse, and that's going to make wood look much better.
Okay. I'd certainly go along with most of those thoughts. Who are the people that you would name on your personal list of outstanding woodland owner managers? And these may be also the same people that you would name if you were to name people who really have influenced your thinking as a woodland manager.
Well, everybody has their own little way of doing business. What you have to realize is not all woodlands are the same. They have different histories. You have different things growing there, a few different species, based on the history of the things, probably in many cases before the present owner even owned it. And the system they're using is maybe a little different, but they're getting good results. Wendell Harmon has a couple tree farms that he has managed in a rather, I'll say it is particularly unique, but it's for those specific things, it works fine. Other people would have done that different, but I don't think they would have gotten good results as Wendell has. I have seen, been on Bob Kintai's tree farm. His is a little different, but what's happening is not necessarily unique to tree farms, but to being able to take advantage of the things that you have to the best is the most important thing. Is foresters, and you go to school, you learn to deal with a classically overstocked stand of timber. That's what they teach you to deal with. Well, not all stands of timber are overstocked, and not all of them are the same age, and not all of them are the same species. But you have to learn to deal with all those things, and the people that are good at it take whatever they happen to have and go forth and do well with it. And I've seen a number of them. I've seen Mahaffey place in Coos Bay. I've seen Kintai's. I've seen Bert Udell's. I haven't been on any of Clyde's, although I've talked to him plenty of times and I know what's going on. And there are local people around here who I talk with, and we work together on things too. But
So it sounds like you've met most of the main leaders here in the state and visited their farms. That's great.
well, I go on the tours, not every one, but quite often. We see everyone, different place every year or two.
Okay. I understand that you're working on several projects that relate to your work here on the tree farm. One of which is, I understand that you worked on a root rot project going back maybe 17, 18 years of experience. Could you give me a little information about what you did and what you've discovered?
Well, the Forest Service has a community project with the U.S. Forest Service Research Lab at Corvallis has a project in conjunction with 3 timber companies and Oregon State University Department of Forestry Lab just north of us. And when they needed some heavy machinery to remove some stumps, well, they talked to me because I had the closest machinery. And that particular time, that particular piece of ground belonged to International Paper, and it was a project in conjunction with International Paper, Weyerhaeuser, and Crown Zellerback. Well, now the ground belongs to Stimson Timber. I don't know how many. Crown Zellerback doesn't exist, but the root rot plot's still there. Well, being a biologist myself, I struck up a friendship with the guy in charge of that, Walter Teese, from research person from Forest Service, and asked him what did he need or what did he want to do with this. And he told me that he'd like to have a number of stumps from trees that had been affected by root rot because he wanted to try some fumigation projects. I said, well, don't the Forest Service have this? He said, they've got thousands of them. But the problem is you have to find them, then you have to get the trees taken off from them, and this is all by contract with the lowest bidder. He says you can take 2 years from the time you find what you want till the time you can get ready to do it. He says, it just doesn't work. And I said, well, it's not a problem around here if I can find what you want. Well, we can make those decisions, and that can happen in days. So he said, good. So I said, well, we'll go over here and we'll just make sure we know what we're talking about. So we started out with a couple small fumigation projects on infected stumps, fresh cut ones, and to set up the procedure that they wanted to use. And then we did one that included around 100 stumps. I don't have the exact number. And they were fumigated and they stayed in the ground for, first ones were for several years, and I'm not too sure how. Then I took the stumps out of the ground, and they, as well as with the pilot projects, took stumps out of the ground and they cleaned the roots off and checked them for presence of live fungus, presence of chemical, where the fungus was alive or dead. And then the last one we did was in the ground for 10 years, and that was 165 or 80 live trees that were fumigated. with 2 chemicals and at least 4 different doses, and just check to see if it'd kill, as well as control trees, check if it'd see if it'd kill the fungus without killing the trees. And that we took out of the ground, it'll be 3 years ago, about now, and they're still writing up the research on that. And one of the things that they have, there's 2 ways to get rid of it. One is take stumps out of the ground and the affected wood as much as you can, which you just leave them on the surface. It's not a problem on the surface because it dries out and gets killed. Or fumigate it, which can be done also, which is a little more complicated. Because one of the better chemicals is chloropicrin, otherwise known as tear gas, and it's a gas at STP, standard temperature and pressure, so it's a little obnoxious to handle.
Oh, doesn't sound like fun at all.
Well, those trees that had chemical put in them, they'd been there 10 years. When I fell them, I could tell you what the chemical was that was in them. It was still there.
It would come out in the wood, or
come out in the sawdust.
Out in the sawdust, as you would saw into it. Whoa. All right. When I was doing my homework prior to coming out here, I talked to someone who mentioned that you were a member of the Pacific Rim Trade Association. What have you been doing with that? Can you give me a little background on your work with that organization?
Well, the Pacific Rim Trade Association was originally started to support free markets for timber. In plain English, that's export of logs.
Mm-hmm.
I was originally started out as the assigned director from small Woodlands to go to their meetings, and eventually I joined the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I am presently and have been a director of the Pacific Rim for I don't know how many years.
Mm-hmm.
10 or probably 15, sometime in the 70s. They meet at least once a quarter, sometimes more often, depending on what kind of bad things are happening or somebody's trying to do to us. And it's an organization that promotes free trade of commodities, whatever it be, whether it's apples or timber, all its primary timber function.
Mm-hmm. So they are addressing other products as well.
It's a free trade organization, part of the coalition that deals in free trade. We have, for years we didn't have many people that had sawmills, but now we have a couple of people who are real sawmill people rather than timber people, because they've come to realize that the whole thing on log export didn't have a thing to do with, the promoters of that didn't have a thing to do with promoting jobs for the U.S. They want to stop the cutting of trees, and the way to stop cutting of trees is eliminate markets. And these mills that are now members, it suddenly occurred to them that when they stop the export of logs, the next thing is the export of lumber, and they're dead meat also, because Oregon has to export its lumber. It can produce more timber than it can use, and we have to export ours, or else our timber industry is going to be reduced in size to 10% of its present force, or less.
Well, Casey, we thank you for your work on that important organization, and see that was necessary.
That's only one of several that I belong to.
I'm sure of that. When I called you the other day, you had just returned from a trip clear across the country to represent us, I think. Where was that?
I was in Orlando, Florida, attending the annual meeting of the Forest Industries Telecommunications Association, who coordinates radio frequencies for the timber industry. Now, which may be a little confusing, but the FCC has aligned bands of frequencies for different industries dedicated to their use. And the organization attempts to assign licenses to individuals or companies that want to use those bands, spread them out over the area so you don't have the same frequency as all your neighbors, so you aren't interfere with each other. And that's their function. And I am have a radio frequency system of my own, low power system. Then I'm a member of Associated Oregon Loggers, which has a high power system which can cover most of the state of Oregon, so it's a repeater system.
Oh,
realizing that from a safety standpoint as a logger, if you aren't within 20 minutes of emergency medical facilities, you have to have a system for summoning emergency medical facilities on site.
so safety is one of the real reasons for having this.
It's a requirement. It can cost you a whole bunch if
you don't have
if
it.
you don't have it and get caught.
Oh.
Now, there are some other things that might work. For years, you had no choice, but a cell phone would be acceptable if it would work from wherever your location was. But up until the last couple of years, that was not an option at all. There just wasn't anything but a radio system.
Cell phone has moved out into this area though now, hasn't it?
Yeah, there's more repeaters. It'll work on the high ground around here. If you go out in the yard, it'll work. If you go down there and your car's parked, it won't. Because the antenna's over on the Washington side. You're just almost to the top of the hill. But they will work from the hilltops around most of these places.
Well, it sounds like radio would be a better choice.
Well,
when
radio,
safety is what you're
the
talking.
radio, you heard it talking up here. My wife turned it down, so it wouldn't be interfering. But that's Associated Oregon Loggers Radio Net, and it works out here in the house all the time. There's 250 radios on it in the Vernonia area, northwest Oregon, on that single repeater, belonging to probably 50 different companies or more.
Okay.
I'm also a member of the Northwest Oregon Forest Protective Association, which is the organization that contracts with the state for fire protection.
Oh, yes.
And we also okay the budget for the firefighting in our particular area, Northwest Oregon. There's Clackamas, Marion is one that you would live in. And I say we're Northwest headquartered out of Forest Grove. The main office is in Tillamook, Astoria, and Columbia City, as well as Forest Grove.
Now, is this the same organization we pay? I don't know.
Your fire patrol tax.
Fire patrol tax. Okay. Because there
If
was.
you're a member of the local protective association,
Okay, we are.
why, if you want to, you get there and look interested, it may make you a director, then you'll have a chance to look at the tax and see what they're spending money on. They shouldn't be spending money on to help control that fire patrol tax.
I see. All right. I'm forewarned, Casey. I'll be careful who I talk to about this. Lest
That's okay. Make a difference to me. They know it. I'm past president of that too.
No, I mean, so I don't get put to work too soon.
Oh, well.
Okay. When I was doing my homework, I understood that several members of your family are involved with the tree farm out here. Did I get the right story? Who's involved out here? Who helps you?
Approximately. My partner in the business is my brother, Robert. He is also a full-time lawyer and does not work on the tree farm, except he's around here on the weekends. He and I own the company. My son works for me full-time, along with at least one other. I've had two full-time employees for about 9 years, working here, and part-time even now, some of the time in addition to that, and part-time before that. And my brother's around here on the weekends, and he helps rock road or work on equipment or do books. He does company books, and the tax returns and the quarterly reports. Some of them, we all do some. My wife does a couple different quarterly reports, and I do some, and he does some. So we sort of spread that misery around.
There's plenty of paperwork to go around.
Plenty of paperwork, as we're independent contractors, the company is. We do all of our own logging, all of our own road building, and do some contract work out.
Okay.
I suppose up here, the significance of that is that there's 1,650 acres on a tree farm, so it takes more than a quarter of a mile of road to get the job done.
Were these all Van Natta family roads that I was seeing off of the main road coming in here to your place
Only
today?
after you only got on our place when you came into the tall timber.
Oh, I see.
You're sitting on the northeast side of our place.
Okay.
The other is mostly Stimson. The Longview Fiber owns up to the rock pit where the white car was. And after that, you're Stimson timber.
Oh, well, I crossed over several ownerships then to get here. All right. Well, Casey, I think that concludes my main questions I had for you today. I really want to thank you for taking the time to make a tape with me today. I think it's important that we record some of these thoughts and mention people's names and what the considerations were that people were concerned about at certain times in the history of our organization. Because sometime down the road this is going to be important to scholars, new members, whatever. So we really do appreciate the fact that you've taken the time out to talk to me about it today. And is there anything else you'd like to add to the tape? We've got plenty of time.
Well, you should definitely talk to Don Coyne-Walrod in St. Helens, the second secretary and extension agent. Like you already had him, and of course Charlie Ross. You've
Yes.
got the presidents pretty well figured out. Ron Larson was the treasurer when I was president. I don't know if he was treasurer all the time, but he was part of the time. He may have been president all the time. He lives in Portland. He actually lives up by Reed College someplace. He's a petroleum engineer for. He's on the stationery. You can find his phone number someplace.
Mm-hmm.
Has been around. That's
Those are the two additional.
the two I think of right now.
Okay. I will certainly do my best to locate them and see if I can get together with Charlie Ross down in Corvallis as well. Okay, that concludes it for today, and thanks a lot, Casey. I've really appreciated this.
No
Bye-bye.
problem. You got all the way out here and got back. We haven't got back. You got all the way out here without getting lost.
Okay, thanks.